Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. River Run 2098 AC, Jaime. It took them far longer to actually set up than he had hoped, and so it was mid-afternoon rather than noon when they began to move against the walls. The siege towers were moved just outside of the archers' range. The trebuchets fired small rocks against the walls of River Run, enough to let them know they were there, but not enough to do any serious damage. Using portable wind wheels, Jaime set up some of the crossbows he used at Castamere. These ones adapted to fire a different type of bolt. His men looking on, amazed both at the distance and accuracy as they aimed them at the soldiers on the highest walls, forcing them back into cover after more than a few hit home. From all three sides of River Run, they attacked without fully attacking, using long-ranged attacks and moving siege towers close but not close enough. The mummery needing to be enough for the watchers to keep their eyes on them and them alone. When night fell, they put guards on the towers just in case there were brave souls inside the keep who'd risk riding out. Jaime calling for his lords and for Cregan, the boy arriving first, and Jaime glad to see him looking unperturbed by the siege going on around him. "You sure you wish to do this?" he asked. "I do, Dusk does," he said, and Graen nodded, sending guards with him and waiting for the lords to come to him. When they were there, he told them of his plan and asked for volunteers. Roland and Adam doing so immediately, along with two of Tyos's lads and Reimagined. In the end, he ended up getting the numbers he wished and asked Reimagined to find the boats and get them ready. Dusk started to howl long before the lords left, and he chuckled as he went to sleep that night. The wolf keeping it up through the darkest hours, and he could only imagine what that may sound like to those inside the keep. The next day, it was the same again. Crossbow bolts fired, siege towers moved a little closer, the wolf howling through the night, and on it went for 3 nights straight. Finally, they were ready, and he asked Jonas and Titus to see it done. Lord Jason was left in charge of his defenses, and Jaime made his way to the boats, Cregan making him take Dusk with him despite his arguments against it. "My mother would never forgive me if I didn't send him with you." "My lord," Cregan said. "Your mother would never forgive me if you were hurt, Cregan. So for tonight, I ask you to stay with Lord Jason," he said, looking at the boy and seeing him nod. "I will, my lord." "Jaime, lad, we're kin now," he said with a smile. "Jaime," Cregan said, and Jaime climbed into the boat and watched as the others moved in front of them. Their armor was light leather and some mail, no plate, as it was not conducive for swimming. The boats moved silently across the water, and Jaime heard the cheers and saw the flames in the distance. The siege towers burning just as he had ordered, and he was glad they'd used ones that were poorly suited to the task, and not the larger, better ones they possessed. As the boat reached the water gate, he was surprised to see it almost fully raised. The note from Richard saying it would be partly open to them, and they'd need to swim underneath. He looked to Dusk to see the wolf resting comfortably, and thought on what Jon had said, motioning to those with him that they weren't rowing into a trap. Soon they were underneath, and he and the others quickly climbed from the boats. Their work would need to be quick, and as he looked around at the others, he saw they were ready. Almost 27 men he had with him, and one very large wolf, and they moved through the route that had been drawn out for them. Soon finding themselves in the courtyard below, above them, attention was focused on events outside the walls, and so they moved quickly to the guard and gate houses. Finding less than 10 men in each, half of whom were asleep and quickly subdued, allowing them to lower the gate and the drawbridge. They heard the shouts from above them, and so quickly, grabbing a torch, Jaime waved it in the air. The crossbows began firing, and the horses rode fast toward the now open keep. He heard a sound from behind him, and watched as Dusk took a man down. Another soon to follow, and then the fighting truly began. "Remember, the soldiers, none of the servants. Any man who doesn't listen will lose their head this night," he said, and was glad to see so many nods. They moved through the godswood, and he heard the groans as 2 of his men were taken down with crossbow bolts. Then the screams as the men who'd fired found they couldn't reload faster than a wolf could run. "Thank the gods he's on our side," Adam japped, and even Roland laughed at that. They reached the keep itself to face men with pikes, and Jaime watched as Dusk dodged away from them, and Roland ran towards them. The Crakehall Lord scaring even him as he charged with half a dozen men. "None so fierce," Roland shouted, and quickly lived up to his house's words, the large lord cutting through Tully men as if they weren't there. By the time dawn broke, it was done. Small fires were being put out, and prisoners were marched to the dungeons. Yarion walked to the ladies' chambers to accept Catelyn and Littlefinger's surrender, and as he looked around at the keep, he felt his anger rise. She had come here for help. A liege lord's duty was to provide it, and protection, and she'd been given neither. He tried to put it out of his mind and looked on as a young girl ran his way. He waved Tidos's boys off when they tried to stop her. Once Dusk had seemed to take no issue with her presence. "They're gone, me lord," the lady and her husband. "They snuck away by boat 2 nights past," the girl said. "Why should I believe you? How do I know they're not hiding somewhere inside?" he asked, looking to the girl. "It were me who sent you the note, me lord. Sent it to Aline. Pearl's my name. I've been one of Aline's people for some time," the girl said, and Garion looked at her. Richard had said he had people inside. This was one of them, obviously so. "Why didn't you send me another?" he asked, almost angrily, before he breathed deeply. "You couldn't forgive me, Pearl. Have any of the servants been harmed?" "No, my lord, what's to happen to us?" she asked worriedly. "Aline is a good friend of the king's, Pearl. You'll not be forgotten." "The others, me lord?" "We'll see them right," he said, and asked Lucas to follow with her, the Blackwood boy moving to do so before Gerion thought of something else. The girl could help him with. "Any word of Edmure?" he asked her, and she shook her head. He walked past the ladies' chambers and into what he assumed was the lord's. He was standing in Hoster Tully's rooms, and he allowed his rageful reign. You killed her. Fucking fishes. You killed her," he shouted, as he began destroying the furniture, not noticing when Cregan walked inside. Darian, the boy shouted, and he turned to look at him, tears falling from his eyes as he now felt no satisfaction from taking this keep. "Ask Lord Jason to gather the cavalry. We ride in search of Edmure fucking Tully," he said, as he sat down. When Cregan moved to do as he asked, he closed his eyes and pictured her pleading for their help, waiting for them to come. He imagined Joy getting to spend time with her mother, and though he'd not give up Ashara for anyone, he felt guilty that he loved her and couldn't love the mother of his child in the same way, that he had not been able to stand up to Tywin, and it had led her here, to these weak fishes, that it had cost her her life. "For Bryony," he said, as he got up from the seat and walked from the room. "The God's Eye 2098 AC. Yak Harris Targaryen." He spent most of the night with Yome, Arthur, and Barristan going over their plans, and glad to hear they thought his one the right one. Robert's army was days away, and Randill's would arrive after they did. It would actually work out better, as if they knew exactly what they'd be facing, then there was a good chance they'd turn, instead go and try to join up with Jon Arryn's forces rather than face them. After confirming his plans, he spent some time with Ser Boniface, the man telling him about his grandmother and how he had loved her. Joe sympathizing with him and trying not to imagine what would have happened had Maya not spoken her prophecy. It was hard to look at the man after that. Boniface had never forgotten his love for Jane's grandmother, and it had not diminished in all the years since her death. For Jay, though, it was the knowledge that events had conspired to ensure he was born. In doing so, lives had been changed irrevocably. Ser Boniface among them. "I'll sleep with Rhaenys tonight. Could some of you at least try to rest?" he said to his Kingsguard, watching as Barristan sent Loras and Arthur to rest while he and Walder stood guard over him. His sister was eager to take the fight to the Golden Company, more so when she knew that Robert rode with them, Jaxley having to almost calm her down so she didn't bring the fight to them right now. "I know, Ray. I feel it too. Soon, we'll do it soon," he said as he lay against her. "Sleep, little brother. You need your rest," she said, and he chuckled. "Aye, you too big, sister," he said as he lay down against her warm scales. He slept a dreamless sleep and was glad of it on the march the next day, more so knowing that he'd speak to Marguerite that night. He rode with Jaime and Lord Sprax and Dannyfort, listening in as Quentin told tale of the Greyjoy Rebellion and D'Andros spoke of the Golden Company and the War of the Ninepenny Kings, both men giving him much to ponder on. When Richard told him what Tyrion had seen, he'd been stunned and had thought of flying to the islands and facing the fleet himself, though he knew he could not and that his place was here. He had been glad to hear that his uncles were preparing and had sent the word out. The tales of the Golden Company had him looking to Barristan for more, the knight a fountain of knowledge, and Jay most eager to learn. "I know bitter steel founded them, sir, but didn't the Blackfire line end when you slew Maxleys?" he asked as Tommen looked on while they sat around the campfire. "Ah, your grace," Barristan said. "Did he really have 2 heads?" Tommen asked to a chuckle from the knight. "He did, lad.
How would you rate the Golden Company, Sir Barristan?
He asked. Formidable, your grace, the knight replied. The next morning he felt lighter, having spoken to Marguerite and just hearing her voice, knowing each day only brought him closer to being with her, even if it also brought him further away from where she was. He resolved to fly to her when this was done, to see her before they marched to King's Landing and to ready her to join him there. He sparred with Jaime and with Arthur, a little with Barristan, and then with Loras too. After breaking his fast, he sparred with Tommen, showing the boy some moves and trying his best to make the boy laugh. Though he'd taken it well, there was a sadness in him that hadn't been there before he'd found out about his mother's death. One Jay wished he could take away, so, as they rode, he did his best, and the boy smiled, a little more each day. Jaime telling him that Tommen was happier that he was with him than he had been traveling with him alone. When they finally reached the God's Eye, he knew it would be soon. The eagle he set high in the sky, seeing the Golden Company and Robert were just a day or so away. We'll camp here. They'll arrive on the morrow, he said to Jaime. And after eating, they went over the battle plans once more. Rainseeks flew some miles behind them. His sister was annoyed at being left behind. But the time for them to see her hadn't come yet, and he wanted to ensure they were lined up before they did. He found he slept well that night, surprising himself. Though the dream he had was no surprise, and once again it was the trident he saw. The swing of the hammer, the rubies falling into the water, feeling almost close enough for him to grab them. Your Grace, it's time, Sir Barristan said, and so he readied himself. He told Tommen to help some of the others, and rode out with his Kingsguard. With Jaime, Lord Brax, and Lord Banfort, and then he saw him in the distance. Robert looked different, and it took some time for him to realize why. The man had lost weight, and looked stronger. Obviously, he'd been preparing for this fight. He heard Arthur and Barristan say a name, and he looked closer. Jon Connington was a name he had heard before, and Jay was surprised to see him riding on Robert's side. Dragon spawn, Robert spat out when they faced each other. Usurper, he spat back and smirked when he saw Robert's expression change. I'll not offer you terms, Dragonspawn, Robert said, and Jay laughed. I'd not accept them from a monster such as you, a man who killed a boy in front of his mother, who ordered the deaths of countless innocents to cover for his wounded pride, a man who could never accept that women don't fall at his feet and worship the ground he walks on, he said, looking at Robert as the man grew angrier. Then why parley? A tall, thin man wearing gold said. I said I'd not accept his terms, but I'd offer you mine. Turn and go back to Essos, and I'll not follow. Leave my lands without incident, and I'll seek no retribution, but stay and fight, and you'll learn what the Golden Company has learned, many times before, he said, looking to the men in gold and to Jon Connington, who was staring at him, his eyes almost tearful. Which is? The man asked. That beneath the gold may be bitter steel, but gold melts, steel melts. And each time you've faced a true dragon in the past, you've been burned. Do you really think today will be any different? He asked, looking to each of them. You think you're a dragon? You're just as mad as the rest of your family, Robert said, laughing. Your family too? Or have you forgotten that, Kingslayer? He said, and were it not for Arthur and Barristan towards him moving then, he was sure Robert would have attacked him. You look like him? Jon Connington said softly, his words barely carrying in the wind. My father called you a friend once. To see you ride by the side of his murderer is shameful, he said, and saw the man bow his head. We reject your terms. Your Westerosi knights are no match for the company, a man said, and Jaxley looked at him and shook his head. You've heard your answer, Dragonspawn. When next we meet, one of us will die, Robert said, getting ready to turn and ride away. Why wait, he said, and Robert looked at him. What? You may not care for your men, but I care for mine. So why wait? There's no need for thousands of men to die here today. Only one of us. Let's settle this the old way. You against me? Jax, looking to Robert. Haw, you do have balls, boy, Robert said. I win, then you men leave these lands and go back to Essos, where you belong, he said. And Robert stared at him. And when I win, Robert asked. The war begins and ends with me, he said, and Robert nodded. Fine, boy. You'll feel my hammer soon enough. 1 hour here, Robert said as they turned to ride off. Your Grace, your Grace. Jaime shouted as Jay rode back to the tents, Arthur and Barristan, and the others behind him. He was no sooner in the tents than it began. Jaime, Arthur, Barristan, even Loras, all of them other than Walder, who just stood silently. You can't risk this, Jay, you can't, Yadia said, his voice strained. I, my king, let Arthur or I stand in your place. Barristan said, I lost your father to that man's hammer. I'll not risk you too. Arthur said, gripping Dawn. Jaxier, don't do this. Lord Yart said, his voice the quietest, and yet his face along with Jaime's the most worried and full of emotion. How did you think this would end? Did you think I'd allow anyone else to take this from me? That man is the reason my father died. My mother, my brother and sister, and their mother. He killed Viserys with his own damn hands. You think I'd let any of you take this from me? Do none of you know me at all? This was always how this would go. And as your king, I'll command you if need be. I ask you to trust I know what I'm doing, he said and walked from the tent, mounting up as the others followed. When they arrived back, it was to see a larger group waiting, and Jay sent for more men, just in case, only riding forward when they were evenly matched. He looked up to see Illyrio standing some distance away, to see a young masked man beside him, and to see Robert walking down towards him. Behind him, the thin man from earlier and some others, and Jon Connington followed. He watched as one of them helped put an antlered helm on Robert's head, as he then handed him the hammer, and Jay took off his crown and handed it to Jaime. He took the helm from him before leaning in close to whisper in his ear. This is what you trained me for, Jaime, and you trained me well, he said softly, as he moved from him to face Robert. The two of them stood but a few feet apart, Jay glaring dark sister and seeing Robert's eyes behind his helm as they looked to the blade. You took everything from me. Taking your life won't come even close to making up for it. Yet I'll take great pleasure in doing it, he said. I'll see you dead, dragon spawn, Robert replied. When you get to Hell, tell them that the son of Rhaegar and Lyanna Targaryen sent you there, the brother of Rhaegar and Adjagon, the son of Olia and nephew of Viserys, and Brandon, the grandson of Rhaegar and Rickard. You tell them Jaehaerys Targaryen sent you, he said as he swung the sword and felt the hammer crash against it. The force of the blow would have knocked the sword from his hand, but Jay was well used to deflecting such blows, and when he swung back, he found that Robert wasn't used to his speed, Dark Sister crashing against the armor and almost cutting through. Valyrian steel against plate, leaving only one winner. The swing Robert aimed at him in return. He easily dodged, and then he began to truly move. Left and then right, inside and out, forward and back. One moment he was attacking Robert head-on, and the next he was behind him, forcing him to turn. He began to use thrusts, seeing the gaps in Robert's armor and feeling the sword as it struck home. The pained gasps from the usurper music to his ears. He could feel the sword call out for more, her thirst for Robert's blood easily matching his own. When he caught him on the back of the knee, he saw him fall and then stumble back to his feet. Robert favoring one side now. The blow that caught him knocked him some feet away, and he cursed himself for getting so careless, waving to Jaime and the others that he was well and rolling away from the next shot. He could see Robert was tiring, the exertion of trying to keep up with him, and the loss of blood where Dark Sister had struck home, both taking their toll. When he raised the hammer, Jake struck and Robert looked on, shocked as the shaft broke in two, where Dark Sister cut right through it, the hammer's head falling to the ground, and as Jake thrust once more beneath the shoulder, he felt the man almost collapse against him. The blow was mortal, and Jay knew he'd soon bleed out. He helped him take off his helm and looked in his eyes, seeing the pain and something else there, something that he swore looked like pride. He heard him cough and saw him look at him, the blood coming from his mouth. End me clean, Robert said. And Jay looked at him, getting ready to raise his sword, and yet he knew. He could not. He turned, looking back to where his Kingsguard and Jaime stood. Arthur, please, he said, and then he saw Robert smile. Arthur walked over quickly with Dawn in his hands, and Robert leaned forward with his head down before he turned and looked up at him. You're her son. She'd have loved you, lad. Don't ever let anyone tell you different. In the name of his grace, King Jaehaerys Targaryen, the third of his name, I sentence you to die, Arthur said as Dawn rose in the air. The milky white blade soon covered in red, as Robert Baratheon was no more. Their island 2098 AC. Aria! They moved through the trees, her bow held in her hands. To her left, she could see Lyanna, and she knew that Lyra was here, somewhere, also. Ahead of her, Namia watched the stag, and Arya only had to close her eyes to see it. If she wished to, she could allow the wolf to take it, but Arya wanted this one for herself. Lyanna and she had wagered that it'd be one of them to take the prize this day, both of them fed up that it was either Rhaegar or one of Lyanna's sisters who usually did so. Aubergir reached the clearing first. Yes, it was somewhat cheating, to use Nymeria's eyes, but a girl needed to take every advantage when the price of failure was so high. She crept forward and lined up the shot, her breathing deep and steady as the arrow flew in the air. When she saw it hit home and the stag bolt, she felt such a fool, only for the wounded animal to make it no more than a few feet before it fell over. Her shot had been true, and Arya could feel her heart beat a little faster when she moved toward it. She took out the knife Jon had gifted her, taking the blade to the stag's throat and cutting it. Cruel as she had thought this the first time she had seen Lady Mage do it, she knew now the real reason for it. "We are not monsters, Arya. We don't wish the animals to suffer more than is needed, so we end their suffering quickly, give them a far quicker death," Mage said. As she saw the life go from the stag's eyes, Arya closed her own and offered a prayer to the old gods, thanking them for the bounty they'd given her, and for not allowing the animal to suffer. She heard the cracking of twigs behind her and smirked when she saw the frown on Lyanna's face. Her best friend in the whole world was glowering at her, and yet she saw the small look of pride that she'd won too. "I hate you," Lyanna said, shaking her head. "It's only for a week," she said back, trying not to snigger. "It's the bloody stables, Arya." "Gods, why did I agree to this?" Lena said, rolling her eyes. "Because the thought of seeing me have to shovel horse shit made you laugh, remember?" Arya said, her own laughter ringing out now. "Gods, he's a big one, isn't he?" Lyanna said after she had rolled her eyes once more before laughing too. Her friend then walking over to take a look at the stag they'd caught. "I think Alysanne will be pleased," she asked, slightly worried. "I think so. We'll also be eating deer for days," Lyanna said, chuckling when Lyra came through the clearing. Nymeria finally moving from where she had sat and walking over to her, Arya rubbing her wolf's head when she reached her. "Which of you?" Lyra asked. Arya," Lyanna said, annoyed. "So you shovel the shit," Lyra said, laughing. "Idiots," Lyanna said, walking away from her sisters. They began the process of cleaning the deer out, redirecting them while she and Lyanna did the work. She gave Nymeria some of the stag's insides, some they'd bring back for Alysanne, who liked the parts that both she and Lyanna really did not. After cleaning out the stag, they readied it to bring it back to the bear's den. She and Lyanna were then sent to the stream to wash, which inevitably turned into a water fight. When they finally made it home, Alysanne gave her one of her looks. Both she and Lyanna in a way lived for them, to see the proud expression on any of the she-bears' faces when they'd done well in their lessons or tasks, made even the toughest of them seem worthwhile. After dinner and some reading, she finally went to her bed, and as she had ever since he'd sent it to her, she read Jon's letter. "My wild little wolf, there is so much I'd wish to say to you, things I need to speak to you about that I cannot put down on this parchment, and that I can only tell you when we're face to face once more. I promise you when next we meet we'll speak of them, and of anything you wish. We'll spar, laugh, I'll muss your hair, and make up for all the time we've been apart. I miss you so much that some days I reach out. I find a bird, Arya. I seek one out and look down to see how you're doing, and I watch as my wild little wolf, my sister, grows ever more fierce. As each day she grows into who she was always meant to be, and I feel so proud of you, Arya. It warms my heart to see that you're happy. When I get the chance, I'll come and visit you there. On this I give you my vow. I'll come and you can be my guide. Show me everything you've learned, and be my teacher, and me, your student. Until then, I wish you to know that I think of you always. I watch you when I can, and I love you forever. We are wolves, we are family, no matter where we are or what we're doing. There is nothing in this world that can ever change that. Nothing that can ever stop us from being pack. Your brother Jon." She had stopped getting teary-eyed when she read it. The first time she'd almost cried in public. The words resonating deep inside her, knowing that he watched her, thought of her, and missed her. But it was the fact that it was because of Jon that she was here that really hit home when she had read the letter. That despite missing her and him and the rest of her family, he had wanted what was best for her and to see her grow. She woke early the next morning and broke her fast, chuckling later in the day when she saw Lyanna working in the stables. Though not so much when Alysanne caught her and then doubled her own chores. They then spent most of the early part of the afternoon training and at their studies, stopping only for lunch, and then it was back to work. Alysanne never slacked off here or tried to get out of her lessons. Alysanne and the rest of them knew just how to make her wish to do them, and she found she enjoyed them. "We're riding to the new stores later. Mother wished us to make our marks." Lyanna said when they finished their last lesson of the day. It's finished, she asked. Aye. Race you, she said, and went to set off, but Lyanna was already gone, her friend beating her to the horses. This is what I should have wagered on, Lyanna said when Arya arrived a few minutes later. Oh, stupid, she said, and ducked the slap. Lyanna aimed her way. They were riding towards the stores when she felt it. Nymeria was tense and kept looking over the hills. And so Arya closed her eyes and looked through the wolves, seeing them in the distance. The ships were long and dirty-looking, but it was the krakens on the sails that were all she needed to see. Arya opened her eyes, leaving Nymeria, and turned to Aurisan and the others. Ironborn, Lady Axelician. There are Ironborn ships headed this way, she said, her voice almost panicked. Lyra, take the girls back to the bear den. You two ride with me. It's time to give the squids a beating. They'll never forget, Alicent said. She turned and she, Lyra, Lyanna, and the guards began to ride back. Nymeria running alongside them. They were close to the bear den when the arrows flew, and Arya felt the horse go from under her. The fall was hard, but she wasn't really hurt, just winded. Once she got her breath back, she looked to the others, glad to see that no one had been hit, though most of the horses were down. Rosier, Lyanna, behind the horse, grab your bows. Rosier shouted, and she watched as some men came from the nearby trees, their gray clothes and filthy appearance marking them as Ironborn. Looking closer, she swore she recognized one of them, but things were far too hectic for her to be sure. And so she did, as Lyra said. Grabbing her bow, she knelt down behind her dead horse and loaded an arrow as she readied to fire. The God's Eye, 2098 AC. Jaehaerys Targaryen. Jay looked at the body in front of him, then turned his eyes up to Arthur and nodded before looking to those who had come with Robert. He took a breath to calm himself before moving towards them, watching as they looked to him and then at Robert's body. Your king is dead. The war is over, he said firmly. He was not our king, nor who we fight for, he heard a voice say, and looked up to see the tall, thin man, a man he had found out was Harry Strickland, the captain general of the Golden Company. What? He asked. Not sure he'd heard the man right. Baratheon's death doesn't change things, Strickland said, moving to walk away. We had an agreement you would break it, he said, almost stunned. Your agreement died with him. You wish for a new one. Then by all means negotiate. I'm sure our king would be more than willing to watch you bend the knee, the man said, and Jaxley looked on as they all walked further away. Here, 1 hour, he said, and John Connington turned to look over his shoulder, nodding to him. He called for the others to take Robert's body, Barristan and Walder, doing as he bid, and he turned to ride back to their camp. His mind racing both at the thoughts of what he'd done, had almost done, and the fact that after it, by the looks of things, it had changed nothing. Jaime reached out to him as they mounted up, and Jay shook his head, needing to think, and so he rode on ahead, allowing Winter to move swiftly and feeling the wind in his hair. For years he had wanted Robert dead, wished for it, planned for it, and it was the main driving force in his life, to take back the throne and see the man responsible for his family, to die at his hands. During the fight, he had been so focused on that, he could think of nothing else. To end the man who'd killed his father, the man who was as much responsible for Rhaenys and Aegon's deaths as Tywin Lannister. Robert had killed Viserys, and though his uncle and grandfather's deaths lay at others' hands, he had their blood on his also. Yet when he'd asked him to end him, he could not. Something held him back, and he needed Arthur's help. Why? Why hadn't he been able to strike the final blow? He knew the wound he'd given him was mortal. If he waited long enough, Robert would have died anyway. Was it that he couldn't bring himself to give Robert the mercy of a quick death, or something else? He couldn't be sure. All he knew was they hadn't been able to swing the sword, even if he was the one to pass the sentence. Cursed is the kinslayer, little brother, Rosiane said in his head. But he killed them, Rye. I should have been the one who ended him, he said, back his eyes closed, as he allowed Winter to slow as they reached the tent. But you were right not to. I wanted him dead, Janesai, by our hands, yours or mine. He was a monster who stole the life we should have lived from us. You're better than him. You have to be better than him. Cursed is the kinslayer. Little brother, and our family has been cursed enough, she said, and he opened his eyes and dismounted before he walked into the tent. He looked to Tommen, who rushed over to him, the boy's eyes searching his own, and he could see the question behind them. Robert is dead, Tommen. He's paid for what he did, he said, and saw Tommen's lip quiver. So he moved towards him and knelt down to speak to him. I need to see him, Your Grace, Tommen said, and Jae nodded. Let them see to him first, then I'll bring you. He watched as the boy nodded, and then Jaime arrived with Loras. Arthur, Barristan, and Walder arriving a few minutes later. Jae took a seat and bid them do likewise, though only Jaime did so. In the end, I couldn't become him. I couldn't be a kinslayer, he said, and saw the nod from Barristan and Arthur and the look Jaime gave him. You shouldn't have fought him, my king. You can't risk yourself like that, not for revenge, Jaime said. You knew it would have to be that Jaime. After all he did, you knew it, he said, and saw him nod his agreement. Aye, I did. But you still can't do things like that, Jae, he said, and Jae nodded, not disagreeing, but making no commitment that he wouldn't do so in the future. It makes no difference. They won't live up to their end anyway. Apparently they have a new king, he said. Ronsley, Barristan asked, perhaps, but Richard said Ridley is in King's Landing. Strickland suggested their new king is here, on this field. James said and asked for some water. As he drank it, he found his mind drifting. I need a moment, he said, but bid them stay while he closed his eyes. He went looking for the door and found the sparrow as it nested, taking it into the air and over the Golden Company's camp. Bringing it down, he saw Illyrio, Harry Strickland, other men of the Golden Company, and John Connington, all of them standing around a table, listening as a boy in a mask spoke. Looking through the sparrow's eyes, he saw the boy was only covered on one side, and he thought he recognized him from somewhere. Whatever was being said, he couldn't hear, but as they all began to walk from the tent, he saw John Connington speak to the boy, and he knew then what he was, who he was, and which sword the boy wore on his hip. Blackfire, he said, opening his eyes. Your Grace, Barristan said. They have Blackfire, he said again. Aegon's sword, Loras asked. Aye, he said. He got up and began to pace around the tent and could only imagine what he looked like. No matter, though, how agitated he looked to them, it didn't even come close to showing the turmoil that was happening inside his head at that moment. Things he'd missed now becoming clear, and he cursed himself for losing clarity, for being so focused on Robert that he'd not seen it. Kinvara had told him of the Pretender, the boy claiming to be his dead brother, and how he had stolen Damesy's dragon. That she wasn't worried about the dragon himself or the boy truly had been Jamesy's only comfort in what she'd told him. How he had convinced John Connington of who he was. James didn't know, but he had sworn to himself that he'd deal with him once he took his throne. If Dainty didn't before then, he was in Essos, I thought he was in Essos, he said as he stopped walking. We need to ready the men. There is going to be a battle here, Barristan. Jaime. Jigsaw, what's going on? Jaime asked. Their new king is pretending to be my brother, a mummer dragon, claiming to be Aegon, he said, and saw the looks on Arthur and Jaime's face. Aegon is dead, Jaime said, leaving no room for doubt. I know, I've seen him, oh gods, he said, closing his eyes. He felt her anger, her rage as she flew towards them. Jainsier, glad she was so far back. The desire to burn them all. Every single man who believed this lie, though what she wished to do to Illyrio. The leaders of the Golden Company, John Connington, and the mummer dragon himself, was very much worse. I'll tear them apart limb by limb. All of them. He heard her basically scream in his head. Rosier, please. No, we fly Jay. Either we fly together or I fly alone, she shouted, her voice so loud that he felt the blood begin to drip from his nose, having to both try to get her to stop, and those around him to calm down. It was no easy task. Rosier, land. I'll come to you. Please, big sister, for me. You come now, Jay, promise me. I promise I'll come now, he said. He opened his eyes and looked to those in the tent, wiping his nose and glad it wasn't more than a few droplets. He'd enough of his blood in the jar in his chest and couldn't really risk losing more. Rosiex wasn't happy. I need to go to her to calm her down. We'll treat with them when I return, he said. I'll see to the men and speak to the lords, Targthair. Jochemi asked. If you send outriders behind us, you'll find him. I'd say he's a few hours away, he said, and Yami nodded. Arthur, Loras, he didn't need to say any more. The two knights walking outside with him and mounting up when he did. The ride to where Ronix had landed didn't take them long, nor did the argument he had with his sister. Though when she felt his own anger and when he promised her that Mummer Dragon would suffer for what he'd done, it appeased her somewhat. When they arrived back at the camp, he spoke to Jaime and Barristan. Their plans for the battle hadn't changed, so there was no need to go over them again. Once done, they readied to ride out once more, another Pearly, and another king to treat with, and Jaime was more than ready for this one, his anger close to the surface, bubbling ready to erupt. Riverlands 2098 AC. Caitlin. It couldn't be true. It had to be a lie. Another of the bastard's tricks to make her life even worse than he had already made it. Yet seeing the boy standing there, his smile, his build, those eyes, he was Brandon's son, his bastard. He had to be a bastard, didn't he? She wondered about that as she ran through the keep and to her father's solar. She wondered if what he had said was true. Brandon married his son Trueborn. Oh gods, please let it be a lie. Please let him be a bastard, just like the other one. When she reached her father's solar, she began pulling books and papers out, searching for anything to prove the truth to be a lie or the lie to be the truth. She didn't even hear Petter come in, and whatever words he said to her were lost as she looked over journals and papers and made no sense of them. Her mind went back to those days many years ago, trying to remember if there was any sign that she may have missed. She remembered Harrenhal and seeing Brandon dance with the Dane slut, but she also remembered seeing his brother dance with her a little later, and Brandon telling her that he'd only done so because Ned was too shy. It had actually made her love him a little more, that he would do such a thing for his brother, proving the goodness in his heart. She did, however, point out that it shamed her somewhat, though soon he had her dancing on the floor and she found she cared not. Brandon had been very busy at the tourney. He'd been distant when they got back to Riverrun, too. But she'd put that down to what happened with the prince and his sister. He'd not stayed long in Riverrun, and her father had locked himself away for a few days after he'd left. Did he know? Had he told him? Pulling more and more books from the shelves, she had to find out. Cat, a voice called that to Cat, was way off in the distance, somewhere. Cat, my love, we must speak, Cat, the voice called, and yet she could barely hear it. Cat, Petter said more loudly, and she turned to see him standing there. Looking at him, she found the other part of what she'd just been told coming to the front of her mind. Potter had put a bastard in her sister. He'd cuckolded Jon Arryn. Lysa and their babe were locked in the black cells, and Jon Arryn now seeking his head. She felt her anger rise. At the bastard, at Brandon's son, at the lion at her door, and at the man in front of her. Get out, she shouted. Cat, my love, Petter said, moving towards her. Get out of my sight, she almost screamed. Cat, it's lies. Can't you see that? It's all lies, he said, and she shook her head and felt his hands on her, felt him pull her towards him. And though she struggled, she had him to hold her. Bidyer, I don't know what is true anymore. What to believe, she said, and felt his hand on her back. Look at me, Cat. My love, look at me, he said. And she did as he bid. I love you, Cat. You, it's always been you. Only ever you. She could see it clearly. He was telling her the truth, and that gave her something to cling to hope for. Lysaon, she asked. I don't know, Cat. When I was riding here, I heard some terrible songs being sung, but I put them from my mind. I don't know what happened to Lysae, he said, and again, she could see he was telling her the truth, and she felt the relief begin to wash over her. Robin is not yours, she asked. Cat, I love you. You're the only woman I've ever wished a child with, he said, and she allowed him to kiss her softly. Peter, what are we to do? She asked, and he rubbed her back once more as he looked in her eyes. Trust me, my love, they'll not take us. I swear it, he said, and she nodded. He sounded so sure that she wished to believe him. After having Pearl organize a little dream wine for her, Peter left to see to the defenses and to make their plans. Cat heading to her room and her bed and welcoming it, feeling the softness of the pillow as she lay her head on it. She was asleep mere moments later, and yet her dreams were once again troubled. She sat as he danced with the violet-eyed, dark-skinned woman, Brandon having asked her to dance before coming anywhere near her. Cat feeling her anger and annoyance grow as she saw them laugh together. The tent was empty, and his things were gone. His brothers not knowing where he was, and she almost stormed back to her own. He was silent and distant, and nothing she said got anything more than a polite smile, and she saw him stiffen when the walls of River Run came into view. The horse rode off, and their goodbye had been unsatisfying. The kiss she expected not forthcoming. Walking to the room, she found it locked as it had been for the past few days. her father behind those doors busier than usual. Kat was a girl again, and together they played, she, Lysa, and Petty. And she remembered her first kiss. It had done nothing for her, but she saw Lysa's smile when she got her own. Her sister was angry at her, and she didn't know why. Lysa's mood sometimes changing almost in an instant. Pettier rode away and looked back at her tearfully. His last words not making any sense yet, they prayed in her mind. "One day, I'll rise so high that no one will be able to deny me anything," he said, and then he was gone. The men stormed through the halls. She knew them all too well, their crimson and gold marking them out as the lions they were. In the front, the boy moved with his wolf, and she knew they'd find them. The hiding spot had been enough to fool her brother, sister, and Pattard years ago, but it wouldn't fool the wolf or the boy. "I want the fish found. Jon Snow is on his way, and he'll want to take her head himself," the blonde-haired Lannister said. "Does it really matter? He's going to burn Riverrun to the ground. If she's in here, then we'll soon see roasted trout anyway." The boy said with a chuckle, "He wants to look in her eyes, to see her dead by his own hands. Who are we to deny the king?" The Lannister said. She heard the scratching at the door, the claws trying to get to her, and then she saw the bright yellow eyes as they came out of the darkness. Her hair was grabbed, and she felt herself being dragged along the floor. The boy and man laughing as they did so. "Did you really think you could hide from a wolf? Come, Trout, it's time to pay for your crimes. You've woken the dragon, and the dragon wishes you dead." She woke up screaming and heard the wolf's howls, quickly moving to the window. She looked out to see the army that was stretched out in front of her. The torches and fires stretching further than she could see. The wolf howling all the while, and she felt the fear settle deep in her bones. Running through the keep, she found him in her father's solar, Pitter, jumping up when he saw her. "Cat! Cat! What's wrong?" he asked as he moved from behind the table. "We can't stay here. We need to leave, Pitter. We need to leave before he gets here," she said, her voice panicked. "Before Hugh gets here?" he asked. "The dragon. He's coming for me," she said as she began to cry. The next night, she walked down the stairs, the small sack carrying her belongings, Petter with her along with his men. She'd cleaned out the strong room, her mother's jewelry, and the coin she'd saved and put aside, along with Riverrun's own. Now in the chest, Petter carried. Cat watched as they raised the gate, and Petter helped her into the boat. The men rowing slowly so as to not make much noise. Soon they were climbing from it, sending it down the river on its own, and hoping that when it came to a stop, it would be many miles from where they had gotten off. It took them to almost dawn to make it to the town, and they only just managed to make it into the building before the sun rose. Kat followed the girl to a room upstairs, waiting alone until Petter came in and sat down beside her. "We need to travel further. We're not safe here. Pittier," she said, and he nodded and looked at her. "I know, my love, but this is best for now. We'll ride soon enough. For now, let's rest." She nodded and watched as he got up to walk to the door, asking her if she was hungry and telling her that he'd be back with some food soon enough. Kat walked to the window and looked out. The small town was remarkably untouched, something she'd not expected with a war going on. She felt the shame of it, though, of where she was, and hoped the mother would forgive her. As she heard the footsteps coming towards the door, she could only think that Patter was right, though. Who'd ever think to look for her in a brothel? The twins' 2098 AC. Tyrion. His men arrived a day and a half after he did, the ships immediately turning back to ferry the rest of the army to him. They could have taken the full force, used all their ships, and done the journey in one trip, but they'd agreed not to take the risk. And besides, they'd still move them in a third of the time it would take to march. Still waiting for the ships to come back was boring, and so, after speaking to Saturn and the Strongboar, Tyrion took to the skies once more. This time he flew over Riverrun itself, and found his uncle's men had begun their siege. Turning back, he flew over the sea, and was happy to see that Ironborn hadn't left yet. Rhaegar wanting nothing more than to set their fleet ablaze. He had to admit it was tempting, but he needed them to attack first, to attack them in such a way without them provoking it. It wouldn't bring comparisons, he knew, that James didn't wish for. It would be bad enough if his nephew did it for that reason alone. Should he be the one to do it then? It would be so much worse. Aerys' son burning them all would be bound to stir up some memories that were best forgotten. So he told Rhaegar not now, and they flew back to Seaguard, passing his ships on the way and seeing they were only a day or so from the town. "My prince," Saturn said as he ran to him carrying the water pouch. Sir Zers and Sir Richard Horp behind him along with his cousin Walder. "Thank you, Saturn," he said, smiling, as he took a big swallow from the pouch. "Gather the lords in Lord Jason's hall. The fleet is almost here." He watched as his squire ran back to the keep, looking back to see Rhaegar take to the sky. He smiled, before turning to walk away. Say Jars and Say Richard in position at his back, and even were he not wearing the colors of his house, the two men in white cloaks would prove him true. When he reached the hall, he found the lords waiting for him, Lord Broom and Seret, Westerling and Lefford, yet it was the strong boar that Tyrion found the most capable of all his men. "My lords, forgive me. I wish to ensure the rest of our forces were untroubled and to check on events in River Run," he said, and it was Westerling who, for today, seemed to be the one chosen to speak. "There is nothing to forgive, my prince. How fares River Run?" Lord Yaxand and Tyrion saw the other lords perk up, eager for news. "My uncle's army surrounds it, the siege towers are moved into place, and I imagine we'll hear tale of the fall or surrender before we join with our northern friends," he said with a smile. "How are we to do so, my prince?" "Join with the north, I mean," Lord Lefford said. Leo was a sour, miserable man, his dark hair graying despite his young age, yet he was no coward or craven, and for that he was happy enough to listen to the man speak. "We travel to the twins, my lord," he said to nods, and a frown from the strong boar. "We should enjoy our stay here, my lords. We march as soon as the rest of the army arrives, and this may be the last we see of a keep for some moons." He turned to walk from the hall and asked Sain to bring the strong boar to him. Tyrion had no sooner made himself comfortable in a solar that he'd been given as his own than Ser Lyell walked in. The giant dark-haired man only dwarfed by one or two in Westeros, and Tyrion wished now that Jay had given him Walder instead of his own guards. Not that he didn't appreciate the two he had, or that he felt intimidated by the large knight, just he'd like to have someone even bigger with him to wipe the smirk the strongbow occasionally wore from his face. "My prince," Lyell said as Tyrion bid him sit. "You are still not pleased by our plans?" he asked, and Lyell nodded. "Walder Frey is a weasel, my prince. A man who can't be trusted. I'd rather deal with the squids than the fucking Freys." Lyell said, his contempt clear. "They are my kin. Unfortunately," he said, with a chuckle, which the man returned, "it's either there or at the Ruby Ford. We cross, and there's hard ground between us and there. I'd see the men's march to be as easy as I can make it." "Aye, but that old fucker will bleed you, my prince. He'll extract a heavy price," Lyell said.
He'll try. I'll pay.
"Gold we have, anything else, and, well, I've a dragon and weasels burn, do they not?" "Aye, that they do." Lyell laughed. "We'll meet the north when we cross. With luck, lest they've moved faster than we. Forgive me, my prince, for my doubts," Lyell said, standing up. "I welcome them, Sir Lyell. Feel free to express them to me. I need low men who know what they're doing, and we have few of those with us." "Ha, you have the truth of it, my prince. I think I'll get drunk. It may be some time until we get the chance again," Lyell said, laughing, as he left. The next 2 days seemed to move quickly. The ships arrived, and after giving the men a day to rest, they began their march. It took them almost a week to reach the twins, and no sooner had they set up camp to rest than the party was sent out to meet them. Tyrion, looking to see Susteron lead the group from the castle. Suster Richard and Suzendors, the strongboar, and his lords joined up with him, and they rode to meet the Freys. The two groups coming together a short distance from the bridge itself, Tyrion looked over the group to see Susteron, his son Suster Reimagined, along with Black Walder and a few others he knew not, the names of, the weasels use many and too much alike to remember who was who. "Lord Tyrion, it's good to see you," Sir Steffron said. "Prince Tyrion," the strongboar said as Steffron looked to Tyrion again, finally seeing the colors he wore. "Forgive me, my prince," Steffron blustered. "There is nothing to forgive, sir," he said, looking to the others who were watching them. Black Walder especially, the man's repatriation well known to him. "We seek passage across your bridge." "Of course, my prince. My father will wish to speak to you," Steffron said, and Tyrion nodded, turning back to his lords and telling them to ride back. The strongboar sat, and Walder, along with Sir Gers and Sir Richard Horp, all followed the Freys to the twins themselves. His two knights watching the men carefully while Tyrion closed his eyes and hoped Ligeron was nearby, the dragon already knowing what he needed to do if required. As they dismounted at the gate, Sir Ryman and Black Walder asked for their arms, Sir Gers and Sir Richard shaking their heads. "My Kingsguard won't allow their arms taken from them." "Sir Ryman, we have this meeting with them armed or not at all," he said, and saw Black Walder grimace as Sir Sturthorn nodded. Inside the twins, it was just as he remembered. Even though it had been years since he'd been here, they'd changed nothing. Even the smell was the same, and in fact, when he entered the Great Hall, the only difference he found was there was even more Freys. On the highest seat looking down at them was the oldest Frey of them all, Walder looking ancient to Tyrion's eyes and still showing no signs of ever dying. "Lord Tyrion," Walder said, looking at him through beady eyes, taking note of what he wore and smirking. "Prince Tyrion, father," Stefan said. "A prince in my halls, huh? Not had one of those for many a year. Even now, it's not a full one." "I get," Walder said, and Tyrion raised his hand when Sir Richard and Sir Jorah moved forward. "Yet get one you have. I've come to negotiate a crossing," he said firmly. "You are my kin. You may cross at any time you like, my prince," Walder said, the smirk still on his face. "Your army, though, why that would put me at odds with the king." "There will be a new king soon enough, my lord. Best think about what would happen were you at odds with him," he said, and Black Walder jumped up. "You dare threaten our lord in his own hall," Black Walder said angrily. "I made no threat. I merely stated a fact," he said, looking to the lord on the chair and not the idiot standing. "You asked me to go against my king and liege, lord. Not something I do lightly," Walder said, and Tyrion resisted the urge to laugh. The man went against the Tullys many times. "No, name your price, my lord." "A prince, you say? Well, I can work with that. A marriage, my prince, and you and your army can cross as soon as you care to." Walder said, his beady eyes staring at him now. "I'm afraid I must refuse, my lord. My betrothed wouldn't be best pleased," he said, glad he was marrying Arianne even more now. "Betrothed? Princess Arianne Myrtelle and I are to wed," he said. "What of your king? He's unwed, is he not?" "Betrothed to Lady Marguerite Tyrell, his cousin, then the Stark boy," Walder said irritably. "Betrothed to Lady Winifred Manderly." "Is there any of you not fucking betrothed?" Walder said to laughs. "I'll not speak for men who aren't here, and not force any to marry against their will. Name another price, my lord," he said, his voice tight. "I seek no other price. If you don't wish to pay it, then so be it," Walder said to nods from his brood. "You would seek to deny us," the Strongboar said, his own anger clear. "Not much in it for me to give you what you wish now, is there?" Walder laughed. "Very well, my lord. When next we meet, this war will be won. I'm sure my nephew won't be too annoyed that we were refused passage here. I doubt very much he'd seek to punish you as much as he would others. Though he's a dragon, and well," he said with a chuckle, "I could bloody seize you where you stand." "Lannister, you could. I'd not recommend it, and my name is Prince Tyrion Targaryen. Make sure you remember it, and remember it well, my lord. Remember this also, should anything happen to me then, it won't just be my nephew who marches on the twins, but my brother too. Remember Castamere, my lord. For the next decision you make could lead to you becoming not more than a song also," Tyrion said angrily. He moved to walk away and heard Walder shuffle in his seat. Gerds and Richard reaching to their swords. 20,000 gold dragons. Walder shouted and Tyrion nodded. "A wise choice, Lord Freys. I'll see the gold is delivered," he said as he walked out. They didn't stay long at the side of the river after that, the army forming up and moving within an hour of him coming back. Saxtavon rode to him as they crossed the bridge, apologizing for his father and offering his men. Targaryen, not keen on accepting them, but then telling the man to form up and follow them, knowing that just like their lord, they'd be late to the fight too. After crossing, they reached the King's Road to find the northern army had already passed. Turning south, they followed and began the march towards wherever this battle would be fought. Tyrion waiting until they set up camp that night, and walking to where Legron soon landed. He took to the air and searched up ahead, finding the northern army a day or so ahead of them, and not much ahead of them were the Knights of the Vale. He couldn't tell if they'd parleyed yet, but they'd not fought, and as he flew over the trident, he shook his head and chuckled. Of all the ironies that life threw your way, perhaps it was inevitable that this battle would be fought there. He flew back and told Reimagined to get some rest. Both he and his dragon would be needed soon, he felt. Deepwood Mott, 29-8 AC. Asha! The Black Wind led the rest of the ships around Sea Dragon Point and into the Bay of Ice. Asha had 30 longships behind her, though some of them belonged to her brother, and would sail on to Bear Island. Her target was Deepwood Mountain, and she thought the plan and the reward pitiful. Corse stood beside her and looked eager for the battle ahead, as did the rest of her men. Asha, though, felt a sense of dread come over her for some reason. Her uncle Victarion was sailing up the Fever River. The Cleftjaw had sailed with his own ships to take Torrhen's Square. All in all, almost the entire fleet was sent north, and Ash felt it a waste. If they had to reeve, then there were richer pickings elsewhere, while she'd not wished to go against the Lancetiers' tales of the ships Victarion lost. And the men who'd not returned were still spoken. She'd have at least gone for the Reach. There at least there was good coin to be had. Gold, jewels, fancy wines, and good food. A prize worth taking. Her father, though, wished to avenge himself on the Starks. Her brother wished to avenge himself on the Starks. Ashia's life as usual blighted by men who couldn't see. Vengeance was good and true, but it didn't put food in your belly or drink in your hand. The Northmen would make them pay a heavy price, and they'd receive naught for it. She looked to the sky, welcoming the night as it fell. Darkness would be their friend, and help them with what they had to do. "Gather the men," she said to Corel, who did as she bid him. Lucia looked at some of her best men and wondering who, if any of them, would fall this night. Crom, Hagen the Horn, Grimtongue, Loren Longaxe, Six-Toed, Harl, Earl Harlaw, and Rolf the Dwarf, these men were hers. She'd won their loyalty and earned their respect, and she could not wish for better men to do what needed to be done. Tonight the Greenlanders learn that we are Ironborn, and we do not so. Tonight we take from them as they've taken from us all our lives. Tonight we are Reavers, and the Greenlanders pay the iron price. What is dead may never die, but rises again harder and stronger, they shouted back. Asha smiled as they moved away. They were ready. Soon enough, they saw the land ahead of them, and they quietly docked. From there, they began to make ready to leave the ships and to make their way to the keep itself. They were maybe a little over half a mile from the ships when she began to feel it. A mile when they came, and though she had over 1,000 men with her, it was soon clear that was not enough. "Move!" she shouted as the arrows began to fly, men falling in front of and behind her. Move they did, and she wished they had not. The horses coming at them at speed, and she looked on as a man she believed to be Rolf, the dwarf, lost his head. They rode through them like a knife through butter, and she wondered both where had they come from and how had they known. The silver-mailed fist of House Glover flying high among the many banners, as well as the grey wolf of House Stark, and others. She didn't know. Asha, along with most of her own crew, began to move. She took out the nearest man to her with one of her axes, and cursed the dirk and other axe she now had to rely on. Behind her was carnage. Men on foot, no match for the horses that rode through them, and if half her men made it back to the ships, then she'd be thankful. Around her were Corel, Earl, Hagen, and Loren, the only men she knew from her own ship, the others she barely recognized. When they had gotten some distance from the fight, they rested for a moment, men looking to each other with shocked looks on their faces. Asha almost despondent to see there were no more than 100 men with her of the 1,000 that had made their way to take a keep that was now out of their reach. She heard the panic sounds of more men as they ran in her direction, their words making her own panic almost threaten to overwhelm her. "Run, they ride this way," a voice called out, and it didn't need to say anything more than that. Run they did, and behind her she could hear the horses as they closed in on them, but it was the sight ahead of her which showed just how fucked they truly were. Some of their ships were on fire, but those were the ones that had obviously tried to sail away. The others were still there, ready to be taken, but between them and the ships stood at least 500 Northmen, and the looks they were giving them made it clear they didn't seek their surrender. "Forward!" she shouted as she heard the horses charge behind them. And as she ran, she found herself praying, hoping the drowned god welcomed her in his halls, because she felt it was only a matter of time until she'd be meeting him. She fought as hard as she could, and when it came, she welcomed the darkness. Corel she had seen fall beside her, the others she knew not, but they had been given no quarter. Asha herself was covered in blood and bits of bone, and she'd taken a slash to her side, but her eyes closed and the end beckoned. "Wake up, Greyjoy! Eat!" a voice called out, and she felt the bandage on her side and took the warm food gratefully, surprised at its quality as she ate it. Were it not a Northman handing it to her, she'd think she was in her god's halls. "Where am I?" she asked the tall, bearded man. "Winterfell. You're lucky his grace wishes you alive," the man said, and Asha could only wonder how she'd gotten here. Soon, though, she found herself thinking on her men and whether any had been lucky enough to make it too, or was she the last of them, and as she lay down, she cursed her father once more. Motkalen 2098 AC. The Iron Victory. Victarion Greyjoy. The Fever River was a shithole, and yet they sailed up it anyway. Moat Cailin was an even bigger shithole, and yet he'd take it as was his duty. Velen commanded, and Victarion did. That's how it had been since his brother took the Seastone chair, and he had no problem with that. He wasn't Euron, he was loyal to their king even when he came up with a dumb idea like this one. Behind him the main might of the Iron Fleet sailed, over 50 ships, close to 4,000 men to take the moat and reeve out from there. He knew he didn't need that many, but he'd been ordered to see it done, and see it done, he would. They were halfway up the river when the arrows came, some with flame and some with something much worse. What foul poisons they were coated in, he knew not, nor where they came from, be it the trees or the shadows themselves. It wasn't clear. He ordered men from one of the ships, which could no longer sail, to move out and find these men who harried their path. Though they and the men who fired the arrows still weren't seen, and more of his men and ships were lost before they saw the sight of the moat in front of them. He'd lost almost 10 ships to fire and at least 500 men to that, or to poison. The true number he'd not know unless he'd stopped to count, and Victarion had no time for that. "It's time," he said simply, as the Iron Victory pulled close to the bank, the darkness its cover. They began to move towards the keep, and he saw it then, the work that had been done, the new walls and towers, and then the arrows came again. These, though, he could see who was firing them, and he directed the men to where they are, his own arrows flying back, and yet theirs were far more deadly than his. When he heard the rumble, his head snapped around, and Victarion looked on in horror. Where had the Northmen gotten so many horses? So many men? Weren't they all supposed to have traveled south? It was clear they had not, and though he had them beat in numbers, they had horse and him none, and so his only chance was to get behind the walls of the moat itself. "Move! Take the keep, quickly!" he shouted, and the men began to charge forward. They never really made it to the walls. The arrows aimed before were only a distraction. It seemed as waves of them flew at them now. Victarion watching as, while arrows bounced off his heavy plate and kraken helm, others weren't so lucky. Ahead of him lay death as it did behind him. Men falling as arrows hit necks, chests, arms, and legs. If they were lucky. Behind him, horses broke through their line, and as he caught more arrows with a shield and held his axe, he knew that they had no choice. "To the ships! To the ships!" he shouted as a horse charged his way. He moved out of the way and swung his axe, watching as the man flew from the horse. Victarion not waiting to see if the man lived or died, looking around, he saw some of his own crew and called them to him. Longwater Pike and Wolf, One Ear, Newt the Barber, and Burton Humble. Where the others were, he didn't know, but the cavalry that attacked them would soon be forming back up for one more charge, and he wasn't going to be here when they did. "We need to go and go now. This attack is over. Gather as many as you can and make for the ships. Stop for nothing and pray the drowned god. Let's us see tomorrow," he said, and Newt nodded. A Northman came rushing at him as he ran, Victarion brushing him aside with a sweep of his shield while burying his axe in another. By the time he reached his ships, he had less than a fourth of his men, and he breathed a relieved sigh that the ships were still there. Climbing up on the deck of the Iron Victory, they were soon moving down the Fever River, arrows flying at them again, though these they were more ready for. When he saw Blazewater Bay and the open sea, he almost cried, so happy was he. Soon they were at sail, and he turned to take stock of the damage they'd suffered. On the Iron Victory, he saw far fewer faces that he recognized. At least half his crew that he'd spent years building up were dead or missing. Of the 50 ships that had set sail up the river, he reckoned he'd half at most, maybe less than half, that in men too, if his own ship was his guide. "Set sail for the Iron Islands," he shouted as he walked from the deck and took his seat in his cabin, the wine welcome as he swallowed it down. He thought about the Inanasha and hoped they'd had better luck than he, a part of him feeling a coward for not sailing to them. But the North was lost to them, and far too many men had died today, and he didn't have it in him to fight just yet. No home it was to be for him, and if his brother wished for someone to blame, he'd take it, though the man should find a looking-glass for the real culprit. Turin Square 29-8 AC. The Blackfish. The Ravens had come from Deepwood Motte, from Moat Cailin, and from Bear Island. The attacks had begun just as they'd been told they would. It left Brynden in a quandary, as he tried to decide which way he should go, who should he ride to help, and in the end he chose to go to the one who'd not called, to House Tallheart, and Torrens Square. The moat would hold, as would the Motte, and Bear Island was beyond his help, but Torrens Square would give them a foothold should it fall, and so they rode and rode fast. His scouts raced on ahead of him and soon brought the news that ships had landed and men were marching to the village and keep. Brynden ordered his men to ride harder, and they arrived before the Ironborn made it too close. He'd faced Ironborn before in their stupid rebellion, and while fierce, they were fools. As he now looked at those marching ahead of him form into a piss-poor shield wall, he couldn't help but feel disdain. Here they were marching to take a keep with not enough men, no siege equipment, and no horses. No wonder they stuck to piracy and attacked on the sea if this was what they did while on land. Form up, he shouted, and watched as the men did as they were bid, some doing so better than others. That's a shield wall, he heard a voice say mockingly. Don't jape until you break them. Those men come to reave and rape. Let's show them where they are and why they picked the wrong lands to try either in. Charge, he shouted, and the horses began to ride. In the War of the Ninepenny Kings, he'd charged with knights against the Golden Company. In Robert's Rebellion, he'd rode with his outriders and seen the Knights of the Vale charge. This was neither of those occasions, the charge not so disciplined and the shield wall far less impressive. Yet his cavalry was easily the better of the two, and as they broke the shield wall easily, Brynden felt prouder of this than he had any of the other two. They turned and readied to charge again, the Ironborn fleeing rather than trying to form back up. Brynden smirking as he looked at them, and enjoying the laughter from the men around him. Ride them down. The North remembers. The North remembers. The shout came back. Hubris is a funny thing, and not something he'd ever have thought himself guilty of, yet as his horse was taken from under him and he crashed to the ground, he cursed himself for his winded and with an arm that pained him. He drew his sword as the first man came towards him, cutting him down far easier than he should. Anger at himself fueling him as he moved to the next. 3 men he killed before he faced the large scarred man. The gray hair and look in his eyes marking him out as a warrior who'd fought many battles. Brynden's sword dripping with blood as the scarred man and he faced each other. As they both looked at each other and then around them, it was clear the day was done. You can surrender. I'll see you're treated better than you deserve. Brynden said, and he wondered why he'd offered such favorable terms to a squid. I think today is a fine day for it. What say you? Shall we let the drowned god decide? The man shouted back. If you wish to see your god so much, then I will let the 7 choose your fate, he said as he moved towards the man. The 2 swords crashed together and Brynden dodged the punch thrown his way. He kicked out and caught the man hard on the leg, watching as he limped back away from him. Moving forward, the swords clashed once more. Brynden, the more skilled, though the scarred man edged him in strength. He heard cheers as men turned to watch him fight, their own battles now over for the day. As the man came forward again, Brynden moved and caught him on the arm. The cut deep, and he heard the man groan, but it didn't stop him, as he was attacked once more. This time, his strike was far more true, though, and he caught the man across the chest, watching as his sword fell to the ground, followed by the man himself. It seems your god wins this day, the scarred man said. Aye, it does, Brynden said back. May I have the name of the man who ended me? The scarred man asked as he coughed and spluttered. Say you're Brynden Tully, he said. The Blackfish. Ah, no shame in my death, then. Dagmar cleft jaw, the man said, and Brynden nodded. Give me back to the sea, sir, to my god, now finish me clean. Aye, he said, as he pushed sword in the man's shoulder and down through his chest. The coughs and gasps soon silent as he took his last breath. He looked around the field. Some men had surrendered, but most had fought to the end. They'd lost some men, but not many. Perhaps a handful at most, and he couldn't help but sigh at the waste of life this day. After seeing to the dead and sending the prisoners on to the keep, he had his men mount up and they rode back north. Through the Wolfswood and beyond, on to Deepwood Motte to make sure the north was secure. Brynden was soon smiling when he heard the men jape and laugh, and before he knew it, he was joining in. There were worse ways to spend a day, he thought. As they sat around and ate that night, eating hare and rabbit and laughing with men he'd spilled blood with. Aye, worse ways indeed, he said softly, as he took a drink from his horn of ale. Bear Island 2098 AC. Vera. The arrows were almost running out, and she'd lost count of how many had hit home. Beside her, Lyanna fired hers, while the men kept coming. Demaria was off in the woods somewhere, and she had directed her to docks below, knowing they needed more help or they'd be in even more trouble than they already were. Her wolf had wanted nothing more than to attack, but the men had arrows too, and she'd not risk her to them if she could help it. Somewhere out there was a man she knew. though hadn't seen in some time, and that he was here, could not be good news. He owned Greyjoy and she had never gotten along, even before Jon had come home. After he added a din even worse. Arya knew what the Ironborn did while Major Alicine, or Jory, wouldn't tell her. Lyra had explained it to both her and Lyanna. They'd take women against their will and do things to them, things that Arya didn't need explaining, and that Theon was here made her worry that he wished to do them to her or Lyanna. She counted her arrows to find she'd 4 left. Lyanna had 3, and Lyra had just 2. Their guards were all injured or dead, barring 1. Yet the men had never charged them as their arrows had kept them back. "Where is she?" Arya. Lyanna asked, and Arya closed her eyes. "She's at the storehouse. They fought them off," Arya said as he brought Nymeria to Axion. The wolf dragging the woman with her, Atienne, calling for men. "They're coming," she said happily. But it seemed they'd have another attack to face before then. The men trying to sneak towards them. Lining up her shot, she took aim and watched as the arrow hit him. The man's pained yell like music to her ears. As night fell, she heard the horses and looked up to see the men fade into the trees, running away like the cowards they were. "Lyanna, Lyra, Arya, are any of you hurt?" she heard Atsline shout as they rode close to them. "No, sister. We're fine, Artos. Edgar and old Tom are dead, but the rest of us are fine, just a scrape or 2. Lyra said, "Come, let's get you back to the bear's den, Lyanna. Ride with me." "Arya, you ride with Lyra?" Lyanna said. And she did as she was bid, looking around to see that Nymeria hadn't come back with them. "Where's Nymeria?" she asked Lyra, and the woman laughed. "You're the damn Wargaria, not me." She closed her eyes and found the wolf in the woods hunting, and she tried to get her to come back. But though the door was open, she was not the one in charge. Not today. Opening her eyes in frustration, she was glad to see the bear den, and see it and the docks hadn't suffered much damage. Once inside, she, Lyanna, and Lyra practically devoured the meal they were given. Arya then looking on while Lyra explained what had happened. "Come here, you two," Alicard said to her and Lyanna when they had finished eating. "Lady Axan?" "Sister?" Both of them were grabbed and hugged, and Arya felt herself almost about to cry with how comforting it felt. The tears falling a moment later when Adyaxlan spoke to them. "What you both did," Lyra says, "you took down at least 6 squids each, my brave warrior women. Look at you, a she-bear and a she-wolf. Gods, I'm so proud of the both of you. Now go, get some sleep. Life goes on, and tomorrow you have work to do and lessons to attend." Alicent said, hugging them both once more. As she lay in her bed, she thought she'd never sleep, her heart still racing from the day, and yet sleep she did. She moved through the woods following the blood. The 2 Foots were ahead of her, and she began to smell their fear. Moving slowly towards them, she saw them finally, and then she was slow. No more. The 2 Foots and their steel hands, no match for her quickness, and not seeing her in the darkness of the night. Throats were ripped out, and soon enough they were no more. These men who had dared come to hurt her 2 Foot. She looked at them and couldn't see him. The one whose scent she'd smelt before. Closing off all other smells, she turned and found his scent and began to hunt once more. Finding herself out of the woods, and as she looked ahead, she saw the cave where her 2 Foot made her den. The beating of her heart began to quicken as the scent began to get stronger, and she realized he was here. He was close, and she worried where he was going. The howl woke her up, and she looked up to see him leaning over her, his breath stinking and his eyes on hers as Arya felt him grab her. "I got you, you little cunt. You're mine now," Diane Greyjoy said. The knife moved fast, and she aimed it where Jon had shown her. The scream from Theon loud as she stabbed him again and again. He fell from the bed, and she looked to see him holding his hand between his legs where she'd stabbed him, his cries both of pain and fear as she jumped up from the bed. "Rosiarsia, are you hurt?" Lorzier shouted as she ran into her room, the guards, outside, and Larna behind her. "It's not my blood," Arya said as she pointed at the man still holding what was left of his balls in his hand. "It's his, Nymeria warned me. The God's Eye, 2098 AC. Jon Connington, he was his son, of that there was no doubt. Yes, he didn't have Rhaegar's coloring, but everything else was his silver prince. How he spoke, carried himself. The things he said to the stag, all of it, when he asked to face him one-on-one. Jon couldn't believe it. A part of him wanting to grab the boy and run from the field with him. Another larger part so full of pride that he was fit to burst. Were it not enough to see him dressed like his father, to see him then fight like him only made it even more apparent. It was clear that he had been trained by Jaime Lannister and by Arthur. God's Arthur lived. Jon smiled without even noticing. Watching as Jaehaerys moved around the stag as if he was inconsequential was incredible. To see him bring the man who killed Rhaegar down was something that would live with him for the rest of his life. To then not end him, himself. To have Arthur do it, Jon was ready to kneel right then and there. Rhaegar would never wish his son to be a kinslayer, and it seemed that one of his sons knew this, which was more than could be said about the other. Fanfiction had ranted and raved when he heard that Robert was to face his brother, almost as much as he had when he heard them talk of what Jaehaerys wore and wielded. Dark Sister, the crown of the conqueror, Sir Arthur, and Sir Barristan at his back. One of the two looked a king, and Aegon knew it was not him. They belonged to me, all of them, my crown, my armor, my sword, even my Kingsguard. Am I to lose my birthright to the bastard too? Aegon shouted. You are the rightful king, Aegon, and I have something for you. Illyrio said, and Jon watched as a sword wrapped in cloth was handed to him. Is this Blackfire? It is. Aegon smiled as he unwrapped the sword. The Sword of Kings, Aegon, also the man who wields the sword, has the Golden Company. It's time to step forward, Robert is soon to be dead, Illyrio said. I'll step forward, and if the bastard doesn't kneel, I'll take his head myself. Aegon said, and Jon gulped. Aegon had indeed stepped forward, and though Jon was torn between two kings, two brothers, and he knew not what he was supposed to do. Jon had listened unstunned when Strickland had announced they'd not be living up to the agreement. Though he had known it, he'd been surprised still. Now readying himself in the tent, he had no idea what to do. They couldn't fight. Surely Jaehaerys would see the light. Once he knew of his brother, he'd do the right thing, wouldn't he? As for Aegon, when Jon walked into his tent and found him with Illyrio, Harry Strickland, and Black Balak, he felt as if he'd intruded on something. Taking his seat, he listened on as Aegon ran down his brother and found he couldn't do so silently, standing up so abruptly that he forced everyone in the tent to look to him. Jon took a breath and readied to make his case. He is your brother, Aegon. Your father would not wish for you to fight. He obviously is unaware of you or your claim. But just listening to him, it's clear he cares for family. Meet with him. Treat and offer him the role of your hand. I'm sure he'd accept, Jon said. Illyrio is my hand, Jon. You think I'd accept a bastard by my side? Aegon said contemptuously. I think you accept your blood by your side. There's not so much of it left that you cannot, he said almost pleadingly. Again looked to Illyrio, who nodded, and then Jon watched as he took a breath, his hand going to the hilt of his sword. Fingers drumming on the ruby. Aegon seemed to take an age, and then finally he nodded too. Very well, if he kneels and swears fealty to me, hands over the things which are mine by right, then I'll accept him as my brother, and he can act as my hand, Aegon said, and Jon breathed out in relief. If not, though he'll die by my hand here today. The party which rode out included Illyrio, and Jon was stunned to see the man on a horse, wondering where they'd gotten one large enough for him to ride. Beside him, Aegon rode along with Harry Strickland, Loswell Peake, Duck, Sarah Franklin Flowers, and Lord Buckler. What had brought the Lord and his men to Aegon's side, Jon didn't know, but Robert's forces had stayed rather than rode away, and for that he was grateful. The same party that had rode to Robert rode towards them now. Jaehaerys, his 4 white-cloaked Kingsguard, and Jaime Lannister. Jon noticed the scowl on Jaehaerys' face when he looked to Illyrio, and the bigger one when he looked to Aegon, turning to see that Aegon also did not look best pleased to be here. Once they reached each other, it took a few moments for anyone to speak, and it was Aegon who did so, his voice firm and kingly, and Jon felt a momentary rush of pride. Brother, it's good to finally meet you, Aegon said, and though it was not as warmly as he'd have liked, Jon at least felt it was friendly. Brother, I think you've gotten me mistaken with someone else. You're no brother of mine. Jaehaerys said back, and if Aegon's voice wasn't warm, then Jaehaerys' was as cold as the wall itself. My name is Aegon Targaryen, true-born son of Rhaegar, and Elia Targaryen, and by right of blood, the rightful heir to my father's throne, Aegon said. By right of blood, you say? The only son of Rhaegar that lives is the one you face, impostor. As for you, Yaxile, you dare insult my father's name by bringing this mummer here. When you're in comes Fat Man, it'll be bloody on that you have my vow. Jaxley, please. Aegon is your brother. Your father wouldn't wish you to fight each other. Jon pleaded. You should know better, Jon. Arthur and Sir Barristan, tell me how you felt about my father. That you fell for this mummery I can put down to wishful thinking. But you still fall for it, though. Jaeger said, shaking his head. Ildorn is your brother, Jaxrys. Varys took him from the Red Keep. He rescued him. Yaya would never have allowed one of her children to leave Jon. Not one over the other, Arthur said, and Jon felt his head drop. It was one of the few things he'd not ever truly come to terms with. Princess Iatio knew she could not save them both. Aegon was the future of her house, her husband's heir, so she allowed Varys to take him even though it pained her terribly. Illyrio said sadly, Aegon nodding along. Don't you dare speak of a woman you know nothing of. You don't have the right. And as for you, claiming to be her son is as much a crime as claiming to be my father's is, and both will be answered with blood. Yaxlieris said angrily, Jon seeing the hate in his eyes as he looked to Illyrio and Aegon. I am the son of the dragon. Aegon said loudly, Are you? Take off your mask, mummer. Let everyone here see the burns that I can smell, even from here. Son of the dragon, let's test that out, shall we? Yaxley said, turning and nodding as the youngest of the Kingsguard rode back to the camp. The knight coming back a few moments later, carrying a torch. What is that for? Harry Strickland asked, curiously as he looked at the torch. The dragon can't be burned. Jaxlier said, taking off his gauntlet and grabbing the torch by the flaming end with his bare hand. Jon almost screamed for him to stop before he looked on as Jane Sierras moved his hand down and pushed the torch in Aegon's direction. Aegon flinching from the fire. A mummer's dragon, indeed. You dare come here and call yourself my brother, call yourself the son of the dragon, and yet you flinch from the flames like a scared little child. A dragon fears no fire. A dragon brings the fire. Yakyara said, So you will not kneel to the rightful king? Illyrio said, I'll not kneel to a mummer dragon, a black dragon, a man who comes here with the Golden Company, bearing the sword they stole from my family. But I'll give you the same offer I made the usurper. Stand and face me, and let the gods decide who has the right of it. You win, and those who support me will kneel and call you king. Jack Agaris, fight you, a bastard. I'd not deign to have your blood on my blade, Aegon said, dismissively. So be it. I give you all but one final offer. Leave these lands and never return. And I'll grant you safe passage. Stay and fight, and when I'm done, the Golden Company will be no more than a tale told around the campfire at night. Jaxley Harris. Your men will fall here today, bastard, Aegon said. Freely, for Rainseas, for Aegon, for daring to besmirch their names with your lies, for what you tried to do to my aunt in Volantis, and for what you did to my uncle Viserys. Before this day is done, you'll kneel before me to offer your surrender, or kneel when I take you heads. But either way, you end this day on your knees. Jacques Sarris said as he looked at him and shook his head, his disgust clear as he and the others rode away. Aegon raising his hand. Jon looked on in horror as the arrow flew through the sky, and then relief when it glanced off Jaxar's armor. Jaxar stopping and climbing down from his horse and nodding to his Kingsguard as he turned to face them. You've woken the dragon now. If I were you, I'd run for your fuckling lives, as they belong to her now, Jaxar said, his voice loud and fierce, as Jon heard a loud roar, and then he saw it as it flew towards them. White-scaled and with blue wings larger than he ever thought possible, the dragon roared, and as he looked behind him, he saw Aegon and the others ride fast towards the camp. Jon alone looking on as the dragon landed and Jackers climbed up on its wing before he sat down facing him and the retreating men. Selvagon, Rhaenix Selvagon, 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 Slater Rhaenix, flying together will bring them fire and blood. Grintiang, 2098 AC. Yendang. Each day they traveled, she felt it, and so did Cher. The dragons were getting larger, and the time was drawing ever closer for them to take to the skies. Elegon was growing more and more impatient with her, Rhaegal too, while Sandorix seemed more distant than ever. Her son was the moodiest of her dragons, something which always brought a smirk to her face, given who he was named for. As for their new traveling companions, Melisandre barely acknowledged the dragons, while the others either looked at them warily or with fascination. The men of the Company of the Rose never went close to them, and never alone, while the SSI who had helped her seemed eager to be allowed near them. She had come to like the large, bald man. Strong Belwes was always happy and jovial. That he annoyed Sandor also amused her. "Keep that annoying fucker away from me," Sandor said. "Why? He just wants to be your friend," she replied with an innocent look on her face. "I don't need more fucking friends," Sandor said, making her chuckle. "Strong will be the best friend you ever had, show you where to get the best honeyed locusts, maybe if you smile more, even where we can get some liver and onions," Sandorex, Strong said. "My fucking name is Sandor. The dragon is called Sandorix, you silly fucker." "Forgive me, Strong, thought you were a dragon." "Heh, maybe you really are," the bald man laughed. She did her best not to, but she couldn't help it, and when Sandor got up and stormed away, she doubled over. She laughed that much, Strong looking to her and slapping his belly as he picked up Sandor's plate, and Dany laughing even more. Once she was done eating, she spent some time with Missy and Irri and Jakey. The three girls had become close friends, and while Dany was friendly with the two Dothraki, it was still the young girl that she was closest to. In 2 years, Missy had come on incredibly. The shy girl was still there sometimes, but more and more she had grown into herself. For Dany, having a girl close to her age was something she never knew she needed so much. A true friend, a sister is how she thought of Missy, and that the girl felt the same was very much clear to her. "Will Westeros be cold?" Missy asked as they sat together. "I don't know, Shier says it'll be colder than here, but I've no memory of it." "And Sandor just laughs," Dany said. "What will we do when we get there?" "We'll find my nephew and help him take his throne, stop those who wish to harm my blood," Dany said determinedly. "And after?" Missy asked worriedly. "I wish to visit the place I was born. Where my mother," she said softly, closing her eyes. "I'm sorry, Dany," Missy said, taking her hand. "I'm good. Does it worry you going to a new place?" "I don't know. I've known only here in my home. It will be good to see somewhere new," Missy said with a note of excitement in her voice. "I'm glad you're coming with me," Dany said with a smile which the girl returned. The next day, when they were breaking their fast, she felt it in her head. Elegon was not willing to wait any longer. Looking over at Shiera, she could see that she felt it too, her aunt smiling at her and nodding. As soon as they were done, they moved to the dragons. Strong, Sandor, Roderick, Grey Worm, and the girls, looking on nervously while Melisandre seemed certain there would be no problem. Dany looked on as Elegon dropped her wing, the dragon's eagerness apparent for all to see. Climbing up it unsteadily, she looked on her back for somewhere to sit and saw an indentation that almost looked made for her. Once she was comfortable, she looked to Shiad to see she was sitting slightly more nervously than her. Rosiades too looked eager while Sandorix sat watching almost lazily. "You must use your mother tongue, princess," Melisandre said, and Dany nodded. "Soigon Elegon, sly Elegon," she said, and she felt it then. The butterflies in her stomach as she took to the air. The only sound louder than the wings of the dragon was the laughter coming from her mouth. Elegon took her up into the air so easily that she felt she could have done this moons ago. The dragon flew over their camp, doing so almost slowly so that Dainty could get used to being on her back, though it was clear she wished to fly higher and faster, Dainty quickly giving in to her wishes. "Iglicte, Elegon, Adiri kiddo, higher Elegon, quickly," she said. And the dragon did as she bid. Soon those below were no bigger than ants, and Dany felt the coldness of the air on her face as Elegon raced through the sky. The camp soon a blur in the distance. Looking over, Dany could see the smile on her aunt's face as Shiera flew Rhaegar close to her. They flew over the ruined city below, and Dany wished to have a closer look at it. She'd been warned by her aunt not to go through Sharadyang, as the city was full of stone men and cursed. "Elegon, Sophagon, Illagon, Conir. Elegon, fly down there," she said, feeling they were safe enough on Dragonback, and curious as to what she may see in the city. Shiada had told her much about the ruined city, how it was claimed to have once been beautiful and its palace of love had been the envy of much larger cities. She told her of the bridge and of the shrouded lord, Dindi fascinated by the tale. As they flew through the mist, though Dindi began to see the city for what it was now, the fogs from the sorrows rose high, and both the bridge and palace were now named for the river and the despair the city had fallen to. She saw the shapes move around near the top of the bridge and watched on as Elegon took her far out of its range. The city was cursed, and the shrouded lord waited below with his grey kiss. Missy had said as she told her Prince Garen's tale, but there was something there, something Dany could feel, and as they flew, she swore she heard a voice in the wind. "The prince will have need of us." She looked to Shiera to see if she heard the voice. Her aunt, though, seemed more intent on flying under the bridge, and Dany watched on as when she did, men jumped from the top of it, breathing a sigh of relief when she saw Rhaegar fly out the other side with her aunt unharmed on his back. Dany felt the time was done flying for today. Elegon flying high over the bridge and Rhaegar flying with her when they headed back to the camp. "Tegun Elegon. Land Elegon," she said, when they saw Sandorix looking up to them. The others standing out in the open, looking relieved when she finally did land. After assuring everyone all was well and making sure her aunt was unharmed, Dany thanked Elegon for allowing her to fly with her. The dragon's trills louder than any she'd heard before when she told her that yes, they would fly again on the morrow. That night she dreamt of men with silver hair being swallowed by water, of a dark-haired, gray-eyed man being held in a golden cage and beseeching his mother to take down his enemies. Prince Garen, princess, or at least that's the tale. They hung him and he called for Mother Rowing to aid him, and then the sorrows rose to swallow his foes. Missy said to her the next morning, and Dany nodded, the voice she had heard still in her head. "The prince will have need of us." As they traveled over the next few days, she took every chance she could to fly on Elegon, Shiera too, feeling happiest when she was in the air. By the time they reached Myr, flying was second nature to her, and as she looked out on the Sea of Mirth, she wondered if she could fly to Westeros from here, or would the dragons need to fly alone. Roderick brought them to the company's base, the men of the Company of the Rose, looking nervously at the dragons. When she told them what she wished to do, they didn't argue with her or tell her she could not, only that they wouldn't join her. Instead, they said they'd find her a ship that would sail her west and that their own return would only be when the war was done. Dany found that odd and questioned them on it, only to be told some truths weren't for her to know. Still, it excited her that within the week she'd be heading home, and she waited impatiently for the days to pass. Each day she flew with Shiera, and it was her aunt who saw them first. Dany, looking down on the sheer mass that rode towards the city and wondering if the cow she had met before was among them. Elegon flying back to the company's base, and Dany finding out from Torrhen Snow that he most certainly was. "Why is he coming here?" she heard one of the men say to Torrhen Snow, and the look the older man gave her sent a shiver down her spine. "For a bride," the man said simply. Returning 77-2098 AC. The Onion Knight, he didn't need news to come from the battle. It was clear it was over almost as soon as it began. When Stannis didn't return that night, though, he made his move. Yoxley, Shireen, Sir Lambert Widwater, Sir Norbert Grandison, and a half-dozen guards, all headed to the gate at the base of the keep. The short walk to the boat had Shireen excited while her mother was much more nervous. When they reached the Black Betha, Davos looked to Mathos and gave the order to set sail. The black sails soon caught the wind, and Storm's End faded from their view within moments. Calling for Davon to show Shireen to her room, Davos waited until she was gone before turning to Saxlys and the two knights. The woman looking at him much differently than usual. "Where are we going, Sir Davos?" Saxlys asked. "Merry my lady," he said. "Would it not be best to take Lady Cierlis to her family?" Sir Norbert asked. "The new king is close to House Tolaidrol. Should he win this war, then we risk them marching on Brightwater Keep if they know Lady Sace and Lady Shireen are there. Besides, House Martell has risen for him now, too. We'd need to sail the entire coastline of Dorne to get to the Reach. I swore to Lord Stannis I'd keep his family safe. I believe for now this is for the best," he said, and looked to the lady rather than the knights. "My husband trusts Sir Davos with Shireen and my safety. If he thinks it's for the best, then it's for the best." Saxley said, "My lady Mathis will take you to my cabin. It's not much, but it's the best on the ship," Davos said, and Saxley smiled at him, perhaps for the first time ever. "I thank you, Sir Davos, for everything," she said, and he nodded. While Cierslys kept below decks mainly, Shireen did not. The little girl spending most of her time on deck with him, enjoying the view, the weather, and annoying him as she taught him to read. Aegon came with his sister wives and 3 dragons. "See that word there? It's Aegon. It sounds like Aegon," Shireen said as Davos looked at the book. "Aye, Aegon," he said, running his fingers over the word. "See, I told you that you'd get it, Sir Onion Knight," Shireen said happily. "Aye, that you did," He smiled. Sir Davos, father, the king, do you think? She asked worriedly. The king claims to be a Targaryen. Shireen, your great-grandmother, was a Targaryen. You know what they say about Kenslayers? Davos asked. That they're cursed, she said. I doubt this king wishes to be cursed, he said, hoping to relive her worry. She sat silently for a moment, and Davos thought he had, the worry looking like it was gone for now, at least. Then why are we running, Sir Onion Knight? She asked, catching him by surprise. Not all who surround the king may feel the same. Better safe than sorry, he said, and she looked at him and nodded. Will we have to live here from now on? She asked. No, we'll go back when we're able, I promise, he said, and she seemed for now to accept it. When they arrived in Myr, he found them a small manse. Nothing too extravagant, as the coin they had would cover only so much. Shireen settled in right away. But Selyse didn't like Myr, Essos, the food, the people, none of it agreeing with her, and as the days went on she became more and more irritable. One day, a few weeks into their stay, he arrived back at the manse with Shireen and Devan to find the lady's mood altogether different. She was happier, seemed more sure of herself, and asking the two knights he found out that she'd gone to the Red Temple and had embraced the Lord of Light. Davos was not happy about it, but it changed her mood and stopped her from being overly critical of Shireen, and so he let it go for now. To earn some coin, Davos took small contracts. He'd sail for a week or two, and it allowed him to provide as their own coin ran out. It was on his return from one of these contracts that he was contacted by a man with a job taking some people to Westeros, a job which paid well, and one which he accepted gratefully. They need to see that his family was safe, and to find out news on the war, something he welcomed. That he then later found out that there was a Targaryen in Myr, one with 3 dragons, only making him happier for the contract, and so that night he told Selyse and Shireen that it was time for them to travel back with him. I don't think we're safe here anymore. We can sail to your family. Surely no one is looking for us now, he said, and though he didn't truly believe that, he really wished them to be away from here. We cannot. The Lord doesn't wish me to leave yet, Surak said, and that it seems was the end of the discussion. Sir Onion Knight, are we really in danger? Shireen asked, worriedly. I fear so. Better to be away from here, just in case, he said, and the girl nodded. I'll speak to Mother, she said, and he gave her a smile and mussed her hair. While she'd enjoyed being in Myr, the differences of the place and being outdoors something she welcomed. Shireen had found it hard to make friends other than Daven. Other children saw the scars on her face and almost ran away from her. If she was lucky, that was. The ones who stayed only did so to make fun of her. Breaking his fast the next day only made the need to leave even more clear. The Dothraki horde arriving looking for tribute was not something he'd have Shireen caught up in. Mythos, find the Northman who gave us the contract. He's with the Company of the Rose. Tell him we're leaving on the morrow, he said, and his son raced off to do as he was bid. Davos himself headed to the Black Deatha, readying it to sail morning tide. Once he had the ship prepared and saw to their food and water stocks, he headed back to Manse. He'd decided it was for the best. If they slept on the ship tonight, he'd take it out to the bay and be ready to leave, even if their contract never arrived. When he arrived back at the manse, though, he found Mathos pacing nervously. Mathos, he asked. Some people came, father. They're inside speaking to Lady Siais. Men in armor, his son said. Davos ran into the manse, his pace slowing, though when he heard laughter. When he reached the room, he saw them sitting around the table. Eurynice was once speaking to a woman in red. A priestess, while 2 men in leather armor carrying spears stood speaking to Sir Norbert and Sir Lambert. Shireen was laughing and japing with a silver-haired woman, and Davos gasped when he saw her. Sir Onion Knight, this is Shara Seastar. She's my kin, and she says Jay wishes to see me. Sharon said happily. Jax? He asked, the name not registering. My nephew, Jacaerys Targaryen, Lady Melisandre, says he wishes to see his kin once more. Shakir said, and Davos looked to the people in the room, wondering, had he failed his lord and his charge? Harrenhal, 2098 AC. Sir Richard Longmouth. For many years, he considered this castle to be cursed, even more so than the Wentz did. It was here he'd seen it all begin to fall apart. Yet as he rode up to the gate, Richard could only smile. For it was clear now that what happened here would be seen in a very different light by the rest of the realm soon, just as it was by him already. That the keep hadn't been taken showed just how different a war this was than it could have been. Richard looked at the poor defenses and the poor force garrisoning it and knew that Shella could never have held this keep if the war was to turn another way. He was glad that it wouldn't come to pass. This wasn't a war of sieges and taking keeps, of those behind walls suffering and those with no walls suffering even more. This war would come down to battles and dragons, and the lands would suffer far less because of it, just as his king wished. When he was brought to the Lady of the Keep, he only felt it more keenly. Osla's good sister, above any deserved peace in her final years, that she had risen for the king, showed the mettle of the woman. House Wynn was a poor but proud house, and yet their loyalty was not to their kin, especially not after what they had done, but to a king that one of their own had died protecting. Have I died in my sleep and made my way to my gods, or is there a dead man in my hall, a spectre come to haunt me? Shella said with a small smirk on her face when she looked at him, "Like the dragons, Shella, my death was necessary for a time. And like the dragons, that time has long since passed. His Grace would be most pleased to see the banner which flies over Harrenhal, as am I," he said, and Shella smiled. "Sit, Richard, for far too long have I been unable to speak to a good man and true, and I take it by your miraculous recovery that you've served our king even longer than I," Shella said as he took a seat beside her, the offered wine gratefully accepted. "I have for nigh on 5 years I've been master of whisperers to the king, ever since I saw him knock a fish on his arse," he said laughing, as Shella joined in. "What's he like, Richard? Truly, I've heard tale of the boy and the things he's done, but you've met him, supped with him. Is he who we've been waiting for?" Shella asked, her voice more eager than he'd ever heard it before. "Aye, he's his father's son without the melancholy. I'd not thought to find a king that would ever come close to what Rhaegar could have been. I believe the son to be better even than the father, Shella," he said, and the smile that appeared on Shella's face was one he was sure the woman hadn't worn in years. "I spoke up for him when I thought him a bastard and dead. That fool of a Tully dared raise a toast to a dead child. I'd thought then that was the stupidest thing that Edmure could do," Shella said, shaking her head. "Not now?" he asked. "No," he pulled on the dragon's tail. "I've heard those songs, Richard," he pulled on the dragon's tail, "and we all know what happens. If you do that, you get burnt," he said, and she nodded. "You'll stay for dinner? It's been some time since I've had company I actually enjoy," Shella asked. "Aye, overnight, if I may," he asked. "I'll see a room arranged. It's good to see you, Richard. Good to see this. When my time is finally at an end, I'll be glad to know it's a good king that sits on the throne," she said as she got up and walked away. After washing and changing his clothes, he took a walk around the grounds of the keep, the memories washing over him like rain-filled day. The place where he drank with Robert, where he'd seen Lyanna Stark for the first time, the tilt grounds, and the Godswood. Richard found himself inside and walking to the weirwood, its angry face glaring back at him as the 13 marks for now didn't bleed. He came to him there, one of his lips carrying the messages, and Richard nodded, sending the man back on his way. There were more whispers to be found out, and songs to be sung, after all. Looking around, he soon found a cut tree trunk and took his seat, the whispers needing to be known so he could tell his king on the morrow. "North." The kraken reached out its tentacles, but the North cut each of them off. The Leech Lord readies to say his long goodbye. "Reach." The rose longs for a dragon's kiss, and the fat flower feasts while the young bud readies his thorns. "Dorn." A frog takes to the sea and heads into the storm, while a snake's tail remains cut off from its head. "Riverlands." A trout and a mockingbird blow away in the wind, while a lion chases after a floppy fish. "Crownlands." A buck thinks himself a stag, while a golden army marches east with a fat man at its head, and a crowned stag thinking himself above the bitter steel. The black hammers rise and welcome a seahorse, old friends reunited once more. "Stormlands." A viper strikes hard and true, and the stag finds itself trapped. The storm is broken, but small winds may join to make sailing troublesome. A fawn travels east in an onion's embrace. "The Vale." A red castle stands firm, as does a yellow tower. Its flames the dragons once more. The baby falcon flies high in the mountain and makes its nest in the highest hall of them all. Richard looked at them and then the last two even more eagerly. A quiet wolf howls long and loud, and a falcon's honor is questioned. 3 rivers combine and 2 armies meet, but a dragon flies to join and make it 3. Opening the next one, he smiled. "Dragons and lions lead the way, while a huntsman strides to follow. east to gold and glory to bitter steel and what lies beneath. The stag is the prize, but she's the dish to dine on. He rolled up the messages in his hand, and when he entered the hall, he walked to the nearest brazier, dropping them in and watching as they burned. Taking his seat by Lady Shella, he enjoyed his meal and his conversation. Stories of Rhaegar and Oswell filling their time. For Richard, though, as much as he tried to give the lady the attention she deserved, his mind was on his lips and the messages they brought him. When he had asked Jay about Rhaegar Bolton and told him his plan, he'd expected the king to be outraged, to question him about honor, and instead, he'd been given a simple nod. Richard, finding that Jeyu's own plans for the Boltons only helped by what he had planned to do. So the bard was sent and the Hippocrates poisoned. The death would come soon, it seemed, and the Dreadfort would soon have a new lord. What other plans Jay had for Domeric Bolton he left to the king, only doing what he asked regarding the Red Forts and ensuring they played no role in the war to come. The war itself seemed to be proceeding along lines he expected, though the Golden Company was a surprise. Richard sitting drumming his fingers and wondering how he'd missed that. "I'm sorry, my mind is elsewhere, it seems," he said when Shella asked him something, clearly doing so for not the first time. "Something to worry about?" she asked. "What?" "No, nothing like that. Just so many things going on at once. Shella, my mind wanders as I look for threats to or ways to help the king. And sometimes I see things that are not there," he said, taking a sip of his wine. "Better that than misread is, Richard," she said, and he nodded. Sleep was hard to come by that night, Richard worrying about the battles to come. They had the men, dragons, but the Golden Company gave him pause. How they'd managed to get to Westeros without him knowing only proving that Essos was a wasteland to him in terms of his lips, that they had come at the behest of the cheesemonger, only annoying him that they'd not killed the man sooner, though it was not for lack of trying. He knew Jack had not wished to use the dragons to destroy their enemies. Rather, the plan had always been for them to be the hammer and the armies the anvil. They would use the dragons to force the surrender, the army to drive the point home. Now, with the Golden Company, they may need to change that plan, and he wondered if Jay was ready for that. His king was so desperate not to be thought of as his grandfather, and now was being forced to perhaps burn them all. After breaking his fast the next morning, Richard rode south around the God's Eye. With luck, he'd reach them before the battle began. Should Jay wish for advice, he'd be there to offer it to him. It was time for the Master of Whispers to be by his king's side, to offer whatever help he could. Stormlands 2090 AC. Oberyn. He sent scouts out to see where the Stormlords had ridden to, eager to see if his battles here were won or if he needed to march and besiege some keeps. As long as the men hadn't gone to join the usurper's army, he'd be happy. His work here had been done far more quickly than he had expected. That part of that was down to his daughters only, making him proud, and so he once again paid their prisoner a visit. Stannis had expected death. He knew that, and so, when it had not come, the man had been surprised. When he'd not tortured him or threatened him to give up Storm's End, even more so, Josie didn't want to take the keep. The men were far more important to his nephew. What had surprised Stannis most of all, though, was his treatment. Though Oberyn had to admit that were he in the same position, then he'd be surprised too. "I'll not yield Storm's End," Stannis said as he looked at him angrily. "I'll not ask you to," he said back with a smile. "Nor will I call on my men to surrender. Your men have been defeated, my lord. I've broken your army. The others are free to march back to their keeps. The king will deal with them fairly and in good time," he said, as Stannis glared at him. "You speak as if your king is different than any others, as if he'll not seek retribution against us," Stannis said dismissively. "Do I? Then you've taken me wrong? There will be retribution, but unlike with your brother, my nephew will be fair." Oberyn said, "You place a lot of faith in a green boy."
"A lot of faith in my king,"
he said, laughing. "I ask but one thing of you. Give me that, and I'll leave Storm's End untouched." "What?" Stannis asked curiously. "Your oath, you'll not try and escape. You'll face the king and welcome his justice. Do that, and your family, your keep, have nothing to fear from me," he said, and Stannis looked at him. "I give you my own oath, as a prince of House Martell. Give me yours, Lord Stannis, and you'll be treated fair," he said, and Stannis nodded. "I swear I'll not try to escape and accept the king's justice," Stannis said. Stannis had been true to his word, just like Jane had said he'd be. Honor and duty. Something the man lived for, apparently. So they treated him like a guest rather than a hostage. He'd eaten well, been left unchained. Yes, they'd guarded him heavily, but the man had made not a move, and Oberyn had lived up to his end of the bargain. Something which, though it should give the man comfort, seemed not to. Arriving at the tent, he never got the chance to enter, the riders coming fast up the hill, forcing him to divert to them. He looked to see Obara leading them, and so he walked to his daughter to find out what news she'd brought. Seeing her smiling face, at least making him suspect the news was good. "Father, it seems we've even more Stormlords wishing to join us," Obara said, pointing down the hill. Oberyn, looking to see Beric leading a small force of men, the yellow sun and crescents representing House Tarth being worn by most. "How many?" he asked. 500 and 200 horse, she said, and he nodded. They'd need more supplies soon, and he hoped they'd arrive. He readied himself to meet Lord Selwyn, the older man looking happy to have made it, even if this part of the war may already be done. "My prince," the lord said as he dismounted. "Lord Selwyn, come to swear fealty to my nephew. I've sent a raven to Casterly Rock and to the Red Keep, saying so, my prince, I'd have arrived sooner, but," Selwyn said, shaking his head. "That you've come is to be welcomed, my lord. I'm sure his grace will appreciate it when he receives the news," he said, and the man relaxed. "Obara can see to settling you and our men," he said, nodding to his daughter and then watching as the lord walked away. "From what I can tell, no one south of us has risen for Robert. Those who fought with Stannis have marched back to their keeps," Beric said when the lord had walked away. "Thoros and I have ridden with the scouts to the north, so when they return, we'll know if the war here is done," Oberyn said. "If it is, then we ride to King's Landing and join the king unless he orders us differently," Oberyn said. "Aye, let us hope it's that easy," Beric said, with a smile. Oberyn decided not to go to speak to Stannis, instead heading back to his tent and looking over the map. Bronzegate, Haystack Hall, and Fellwood, if they'd not risen, then they could begin their march north. House Fell, he knew it not, at least not yet. House Errol they'd fought on the field for Stannis. If they've retreated, then all would be well. House Buckler rode with the usurper by all accounts, and while he could besiege them, it would only keep him here and out of the war. Mace Tyrell he was not. A viper was made for striking, not besieging. Not even Thoros arrived later that night, and the news they brought was equally as good as Albaraz. The War of the Storm was over. The war for the throne was about to get a viper's kiss. When he went to bed that night, he felt excited, eager to ride in the morning, and to see King's Landing and hopefully his nephew soon. He looked to the bird in the cage and laughed. "Are you in there, nephew? I march to King's Landing on the morrow. Do let me know if I'm going the wrong way," he said as he lay down to sleep. He tried not to chuckle as he dressed himself the next morning and caught the smell of the bird shit from where he sat. His daughters thought him mad. He knew. Cleaning its cage himself, talking to it morning and night, he was sure if anyone else saw him, then it would be even worse. But the things his nephew could do with these birds were beyond even Oberyn, and so he did as he was bid and spoke once more. His plans clear as he readied to take down the tent and march. "Father, Dornish sails," Tight-eared running into his tent, his daughter scrunching up her nose at the smell. "How many ships?" he asked. 3. One bearing the royal flag, Tidy said worriedly. It worried him too, and as he rode to the beach and watched the rowboat being lowered, he breathed a sigh of relief. "Your cousin Quentyn," he said, and saw his girls nod their own relief clear. They had made a plan for Arianne or Olaria to come to them if need be, or if his brother proved false, and that it wasn't them meant that things were still in hand. Though why Quentyn had come, he wasn't sure. His nephew had no mind for war, and had not even offered to join them when they'd left. Oberyn watched him, and those who were with him as they climbed from the boat. Sir Garrus Drinkwater, Sir Willem Wells, 2 of his nephew's followers, and as he looked closer he could see none of his or Arianne's men were accompanying them. Knowing then it was clearly Doran who sent him, and not his niece. Still, he welcomed him warmly, and when Quentyn asked to speak to him in Perivit once he was settled, Oberyn was glad he'd not taken down his tent. He nodded to Taiyang and walked to his tent. It seemed not that they'd not be setting off for some time. It took far longer for his nephew to come to him than he had expected, and when he did, he was not alone, Oberyn welcoming him into his tent as he looked at those who'd accompanied him. The 2 of them took a seat, and his nephew gratefully accepted the wine while outside Sir Garrus, and Sir Willem had been joined by Cletus and Archibald Yarnwood. Oberyn looked at his nephew as he lounged in his seat, drinking the wine and asking for another. The boy's nerves clearly on display, and Oberyn wondered what he had to be nervous about. Uncle Father sent me here because circumstances have changed, Quentin said, handing him a letter. What circumstances? He asked. It explains it better than I can, Quentin said, and he nodded, opening the letter and seeing his brother's handwriting. Brother, I've received the most welcome news. News I had never even hoped to wish for. Our nephew lives. Aegon is alive, brother. I've received proof beyond doubt that he rides with the Golden Company and is accompanied by Illyrio Mopatis and Jon Connington. He rides to treat with Jaehaerys, but I fear for his safety. Word has reached me that Jaehaerys will refuse to accept his brother's claim, his brother's right, that he seeks the throne as he fears that Aegon would take his bride from him, or that Olenna Tyrell would not go forward with the match. Love can be a powerful motivator as well, you know, brother, and it is the death of duty. We have no choice but to fight for our blood, for our true blood, and I ask you to lead our men to fight for Aesir's son, her true son, for Dorne brother, for Aesir, for Reimagined Aegon. We must rise. Your brother, Doran Martell, unbowed, unbent, unbroken. Is this some kind of jape? Has my brother lost his mind? He said angrily as he stood up, Quentin looking at him fearfully. It is the truth, uncle. Father has no reason to lie. You wish me to go against my kin, my king, based on what? He said. And Quentin shook his head. He saw his nephew rise to his feet, and he was about to move to him when the bird began to sing, the chirps sounding like a morning call. Quentin turned and looked at the bird like it was a strange exotic beast, and Oberyn looked down at the letter and then at his nephew once more. Forgive me, nephew. It seems I've overreacted. Axon lives. My brother is right. We march for Eliez's son, he said, and saw the deep relieved breath his nephew took. Thank the gods, I'm happy to have you lead us, uncle. Father says we've to march to join with Akin and the Golden Company, but to look as if we march against them, Quentin said.